I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Ryan Hamilton.
I think that we are too credulous towards all scientific findings, but especially towards behavioral science findings because they feel so applicable. Whereas if we want to understand and apply behavioral science, we really need to understand the boundaries around any particular theory. One little catchphrase that I've developed when I teach this stuff is behavioral science does not work in general.
Ryan Hamilton is an associate professor of marketing at Emory University's Goizueta Business School. He has consulted on branding with Walmart, FedEx, Home Depot, Caterpillar, ConAgra, Cigna, Visa, and Ipsos, among others, and has been a keynote speaker. He co-hosts a podcast called The Intuitive Customer, which applies the insights of behavioral science to customer experience. He has produced lecture series on both marketing and human decision-making for the Great Courses. He's also the co-author of the book, The Growth Dilemma. My interview with Ryan Hamilton is coming right up, but first...
Are you tired of juggling multiple software tools to manage your agency? Say hello to Deltek Workbook, the ultimate solution for marketing and communication agencies. With Workbook, you can streamline your projects, resources, and finances all in one place. Imagine real-time dashboards and reports giving you full visibility into your projects, people, and financials. Plan your team's capacity weeks in advance to avoid bottlenecks while staying on budget to maximize project margins. Plus, Workbook works perfectly for both agencies and in-house marketing teams looking to boost efficiency and profitability. And here's the best part. At PCI, we're a certified Deltek partner and reseller offering expert implementation, integrations, and ongoing support to ensure your success. Want to see how Deltek Workbook can transform your operations? For a free consultation, visit pci.us/podcast today. That's pci.us/podcast.
Quick question. How confident are you that your content actually connects in every market? If you're guessing, it might be time to check out Phrase. Phrase is the industry-leading AI localization platform that helps you deliver content in multiple languages without losing your tone, your message, or your mind. It automates the manual work, slashes review time, and gives you real data on what's working where. Brands like Uber and Zendesk trust Phrase to scale their content across the globe and get it right every time. If you're serious about reaching more people and driving better results internationally, head over to phrase.com/MPN and take a look. That's phrase.com/MPN. Ryan Hamilton, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So your bio is sort of sitting there at the intersection of behavioral science and marketing. And I feel like we talk a lot about the chocolate and peanut butter that are these two things, but I feel like sometimes they aren't quite as easy to understand as the chocolate and peanut butter comparison. What are most people getting wrong or not seeing about that connection?
What a great question. So behavioral science is a research field, right? So it's kind of this unhealthy amalgamation of economics and psychology, draws from both of these fields. And you have a lot of people who started in psychology who that's where their training was, and they got into behavioral science from that perspective, and some people from other fields as well. I never sought out to be a psychologist. So when I went back to graduate school, I wanted a degree in marketing. Like, that's what I cared about. I found that very interesting, and I wanted to know more about that. Now, my research interests within my first year at grad school, I think headed in that direction, where I became a behavioral science researcher. But what people like who try to force these things together, I think they can work very well together. They're very much chocolate and peanut butter, but they are very much different things. You know, marketing is the principle within businesses that tries to understand what customers want and understand and try to meet those needs. And behavioral science is a fantastic tool for being able to do that, but it's not the only one. And I joke around a little bit about I wouldn't trust the average business school professor to run a lemonade stand. And I say that lovingly only because we tend to hyper focus, and we tend to get real deep and narrow, because that's our job, real deep and narrow on very specific topics. And that can leave us blind to some of the other broader concerns of running a business. And so that's my concern, is if people, I love getting people enthusiastic about behavioral science. I love talking about it. I think it's an amazing tool and it can do so much for us. But if we try to replace marketing with behavioral science, I think we've failed both disciplines.
As a business school professor, I can neither confirm nor deny.
I was going to say, did I offend you, or are you on board?
No. I'll just again, neither confirm nor deny your lemonade stand theory, other than to say
ducking
that
your head is a perfectly acceptable response, Nick, and probably the wiser one.
So as we talk about that, it is kind of this disconnect that you're highlighting is an acknowledgement of the importance, but to the lemonade stand of it all, how do you put behavioral science theory into practice as a marketer?
Oh gosh, so this we may not get to talk about anything else today. Like we've stumbled on one of my hobby horses. So one of the minor things that I've gotten kind of obsessed with over the last few years is that question. I think that we are too credulous towards all scientific findings, but especially towards behavioral science findings, because they feel so applicable. Whereas if we want to understand and apply behavioral science, we really need to understand the boundaries around any particular theory. So one little catchphrase that I've developed when I teach this stuff is behavioral science does not work in general. It only ever works in specific. And so until you know what the boundaries are around any theory, and this is any theory, so any theory in economics, any theory in organizational theory, like any domain that you want to talk about, nothing works in predicting human behavior all the time in every situation. Nothing. There's nothing interesting we can say about people that is always true. And so we need to figure out, am I on the right side of a boundary that makes it true or makes it more likely? Or am I on the other side? It doesn't matter if this theory holds in 95% of the time. If you happen to be in the 5% where it doesn't, you try to apply that to your business, it's going to fail and you're going to be out of a job. So the long answer to that short question is, it's not enough to know the theory. It's not enough to know the findings. It's not enough to understand the stuff. If we want to then go and apply it, we also need to now start worrying about the boundary conditions around the theory. What are the contexts in which this is likely to be true, and what are the contexts in which this is likely not to work?
Well, a big part of that context too, and the challenge of the general, is our assumption, again, back to the generality challenge, is that customers are rational. I mean, that's part of the context. So how do we, with everything else, navigate the irrationality of customers today?
So rationality is a loaded term in from the perspective that a lot of the people who disagree, because you'll get people who disagree with what you just said, right? That if you get an economist in here, they will say, no,
please no.
Don't turn around. There's one behind you. So you'll get people who disagree with that, who will say, no, people are rational in some fundamental sense, in some way that almost always when people get into fights about rationality, they don't bother to define the terms. And so an economist can say people are rational because they define rationality around several key axioms that are generally true of most people most of the time. And so they can say, well, that's close enough. They're rational. When you say that people are rational, I assume you mean that they're inconsistent in ways that are kind of outside of what a strict, consistent, rational economic decision maker should be. And you're kind of both right. We're all right, depending on which definition we use. And if we settle on definitions, most of the disagreement goes away, I've found. In terms of what do you do with a consumer trying to predict their behavior when they're irrational? Part of that chaos is to this idea that we just talked about, which is that your customer in any given situation is under the influence of a whole bunch of psychological factors that they're trying to deal with and a whole bunch of environmental factors that you can deal with. And to the extent that you can try to anticipate what more of those factors are, that seemingly irrational behavior will become more predictable. And we can start to get a better idea of what's going on and how people are making their decisions. So some of that irrationality is illusory, and we can kind of reduce the noise on that. But the other thing we can do is triangulate across kind of disciplines and insights. And so bring your behavioral science over, bring your economic models over too. Like let's just have an information party, and let's try to bring as much insight as we can to trying to understand the crazy monkeys in people's head.
Well, all of this makes me think of, understanding the customer and your podcast, the Intuitive Customer podcast. What's one thing that has surprised you that you've learned along the way about customer experience?
So that podcast has been a real lot of fun for me. I partner with a guy who's kind of one of the early thought leaders in customer experience. Like I said, I'm a marketing guy, and customer experience is a part of that. But this has been a real learning journey for me over the last 7 or 8 years, where my co-host Colin, he comes from this customer experience side, and then I come from the academic side, and we kind of try to reconcile those viewpoints. Things that have surprised me about customer experience on the customer side is how influential it is. Just how much, when I look at decision making from an academic perspective, I go real narrow, right? Like, here's a decision set of 3 different cars. How are you going to choose between these cars based on the 4 bits of information I give you? And that helps explain some things about how people make decisions. But the experience, kind of the visceral reaction, the emotions of it are just really powerful. The memories that people form, those are really powerful. From the business side of customer experience, I'm shocked at how often firms still kind of don't do the basics on looking from an experience perspective. There's a lot of advantage to be had there if we can kind of dig in and focus. Get on the other side of the table. Think about what it means to your customers to experience your services or your goods in the way that they do as customers.
On Brand will be right back after this.
The Red Hot Clearance event is on right now at Burlington, and I'm excited for the markdowns. It's all about savings on top of savings throughout the store. This is when I stock up on styles for my closet, home decor, and much more, because there's up to 70% off other retailers' prices on clearance. I mean, I'm going every day because these prices, too hot to miss. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow. Styles and selections may vary by location.
Now, back to the show. So you are the co-author of a new book with Annie Wilson, The Growth Dilemma. And I wonder if you'd imagine we're in an elevator. What's the quick pitch for what The Growth Dilemma is all about, and what drove you to write it?
Great. Yeah. So Growth Dilemma is the basic idea that as a brand grows, it tends to attract more customers. That's usually how we measure growth. And as you get more customers, these different people will start to want different things from your brands. And that becomes a relationship problem that brands need to solve. So it's no longer enough to serve segment A and make them happy, and serve segment B and make them happy. You also need to give some consideration as to how well segments A and B are going to get along with each other. And by serving segment A, are you going to accidentally make your brand less appealing to segment B? Or is the fact that segment A is there, is that going to provide additional motivation to segment B, that they're going to like your brand even more? So the elevator pitch for this is customer segment relationship management. If you're going to grow your brand, you're going to serve enough customers, you need to start to worry about how well they play together and manage those relationships, or your growth could stall out and sometimes even collapse.
You set me up perfectly with your mention of the customer relationship types, because the book walks through 4 different customer relationship types. I wonder if you could give a brief description of each and how they interact with one another.
Yeah, so we set them up in a nice business school 2x2 matrix, and so I'll let people look to the book for yeah. My bona fides there. We'll let people look to the book for how they're arranged. But walking through the four of them, three of them are good news or potential good news for growth. One of them is very problematic. So the three good ones, one we call separate communities. This is the idea that you can serve certain segments and they'll tend to not rub up against each other too much. You can serve them and they'll kind of generally be happy. One fun example that we talk about in the book a little bit is Pedialyte is this hydration drink that was designed for sick kids, and it works very well. It hydrates you about as well as getting an IV drip. Like, it's very, very great at that. And some clever people figured out that after you've had too much alcohol, hydrating yourself well is a good way to stave off a hangover. So probably college kids, I assume. Some group of people started using this as a hangover remedy, and it really caught on. Now it's something like 40 or 50% of all Pedialyte is purchased by adults for adults. So here's two segments that Pedialyte serves. All the evidence that we've been able to find, they serve both of those segments simultaneously without any problems. Like, they kind of know about each other. And I think Pedialyte has managed that very well. But you could imagine that blowing up, and the fact that there are these partiers who are also drinking the drink might turn off the nervous parents. But Pedialyte has managed that well. These are separate groups of people who both buy the brand, and they're both well served by it. So that's one way to grow. You add on additional segments, and you kind of create walls between them, and everybody's happy. There's no problems. The second category of relationships that we identify as what we call connected communities. This is brands that benefit from network effects. So the more people are added into the brand community, the better it works for everybody. Everybody's better off. A lot of social networks work this way. A lot of two-sided markets like eBay or Uber work this way. The more people are using it, the better. Venmo. My favorite example of this is Microsoft Office. So before Microsoft Office became the standard, there were a lot of different word processing programs that couldn't communicate with each other. And so the more people started adopting Microsoft Office, the more valuable it became for everybody, because now everybody could share documents. So that's connected communities. The third one is leader follower. This is where you got one segment that is aspirational in some way. It's cooler, it's more expert, has more authenticity. And then there's another segment that follows because it serves that segment well. There are lots of brands that do this. Harley Davidson serves a surprisingly small number of actual outlaws, but the fact that they're there makes me feel a lot cooler as I'm, riding my Harley away from brunch with the in-laws. A lot of fashion brands are this way. Carhartt's a great example. Like the fact that it serves actual blue-collar workers gives the brand a lot of credibility when it's worn by the college students I teach, who are kind of a follower brand or follower segment in that one. Last category is incompatible segments, and this is mostly bad news. If you're serving segments that are incompatible, they conflict in some way. So they want different things from the brand, and these differences are kind of irreconcilable, and it causes a lot of conflict and a lot of problems. So we encourage people to aim for the three relationship types that work and can facilitate growth. And if you find yourself serving incompatible segments, you're going to have to do something about it, or it'll cause problems for your brand.
So another idea that you talk about in the book that's one of those that sounds really dramatic is firing customers, which strategically I think people can see the logic in. Feels scary.
Oh, terrifying.
And another one of those ideas that's hard to bring into practice. I wonder if you'd make it a little less scary or able for marketers to consider trying this?
Sure. It is scary, and it should make brands nervous, and you should investigate other things first. So this should not be your go-to.
Right. Just fire customers.
That's right. Just anybody that kind of looks at you weird, just drop them as a customer immediately. No. So it is counterintuitive, though. Sometimes as you are attracting more customers to your brand, the conflict between some of these segments is so great that you might end up driving off a larger segment or a more valuable segment by keeping this other group of customers on board. And so sometimes you do need to let them go. One example that we detail in the book is Patagonia. So Patagonia has like real deep environmental roots, really credible on that. The founders of the company have donated almost all of the money that they've made at this point, or set it aside in a trust for environmental causes. And their core customer segment loves them for it. And it's very, very highly credible as an environmental brand. But it started to get popular, I don't know, decade and a half ago among employees at tech companies and consulting firms and finance firms who would buy these fleece vests and then have their company name embroidered on it. There's an amazing Instagram feed. I'm going to see if I can remember. I think that it's called Midtown Uniform. And I will encourage all of your listeners to go and spend some time on there. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay. It's amazing. It's amazing. So it's pictures that somebody has taken in and around Manhattan of these like little clusters of guys coming out of their offices, all wearing identical matching fleece vests. And they're like walking to lunch or whatever. And the captions on them that whoever runs the account came up with are just amazing. They're hilarious. But it's become kind of a uniform of these certain types of companies. That was making Patagonia a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But at some point they realized it was starting to undermine their brand credibility. So they were partnering with firms that didn't necessarily, jibe with their values, that these were not companies that were necessarily aligned on, pro-environmentalism or, some of these other causes that are important to Patagonia customers. So Patagonia killed the division. They no longer sold in bulk to these companies under this program where they would embroider your brand name on it, which was painful. They had to give up a lucrative segment of the market who were willing to pay them a lot of money because it was damaging their brand image with their core customer, which they valued more. So it's an extreme solution. Give it some real consideration. But sociologists have this idea of costly signals. Peacock feathers are costly because they're just so outlandish. They really slow the bird down. But they signal something, and the fact that they're costly shows more commitment to that. Brands can do that too. And firing a customer segment is a costly signal that can show that you are really committed to this particular value. I think Patagonia did that. So don't do it yet, but it's sometimes what you need to do to resolve a conflict between customer segments.
Fascinating. And as we talk about growth, and I think back to what you said earlier, you had a great line that you mentioned using in class about generalities. And in the book, you write, brands should be like spandex. They should fit tightly around your initial customer base, but also be conceptually stretchy enough to accommodate future growth. And I love that idea because I feel like we get the first part of the spandex metaphor right as marketers, or close to right, of need to fit like a glove. But the stretchiness we don't always see. So what drove you to write what I think is really an important and catchy idea in the book?
Well, thank you. A lot of the book is about conflict and how to resolve it. And we do spend some time on the various factors that'll affect this one way or the other. Conflict will not exist within one brand in the same way that it would in another brand. And so the brand itself is one of these factors that can drive that. There are certain brands that have a very rigid meaning. And when customers are invited in that have a different set of values or a different set of preferences, it can kind of break the meaning of the brand in a way that current customers are just confused by or don't understand. There are other brands that have a real kind of loose definition. I mean, Virgin is the prototypical example. Virgin sells everything, including space flight at this point, all under the Virgin brand. And so that's a real kind of loose, stretchy definition. And so Virgin can accept in a lot of different types of customers before it really starts to chafe. They start to chafe at each other for all being there. So think about the value of your brand to your customers. What does your brand mean to those customers? And if the meaning is very rigid and tight, there are advantages to that. A brand that is very tightly focused in its meaning can do certain things that other more amorphously defined brands can't. But the trade-off is, or among the trade-offs, is you're going to have a harder time growing into new segments because you're either going to need to change the meaning of the brand to accommodate those new segments, or you're going to drive off one group or another that you're trying to attract. So yeah, like as you grow, give some thought as to what your brand means, but give some thought as to how much that meaning can be expanded over time.
Well, whether talking about conceptual spandex or the Midtown uniform, I've been smiling throughout our conversation, but it's now my turn, Ryan, to get to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
I love it. So it was recently my birthday, not too long ago, and
Happy birthday.
My lovely wife got me. I'm a hobbyist woodworker, and so she got me a tool. It's a little hand plane, but it comes from a brand called Bridge City Toolworks, which is a small company that makes mostly hand tools, and they are works of art. It's a very utilitarian tool. Hand planes have been around for literally thousands of years, and they just take so much care to design. I'm afraid to use it. It's one of these things that's meant to serve a utilitarian purpose, and it functions very well in doing that. But yeah, a brand that can take something workaday and turn it into a source of delight and beauty, it makes me smile, and it makes me, celebrate the accomplishments of other people that they can create on that scale. Just makes me happy.
Awesome. That is a great example and a meaningful smile as well. Ryan, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You could go to my profile at Emory University. The book is on sale anywhere that you can buy books nowadays. So go and check that out.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Ryan Hamilton, thanks for being on brand with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.